Hello and welcome to the book thing. I'm Mark, and again, I'm on the side of a mountain in North Wales. I quite like doing these, even if the wind does mean I have to do some jiggery pokery with the sound when I'm editing this. But it's a nice change to be out from in front of a bookshelf. So today I'm doing the reader profile tag. I was tagged by Annie at Obscure Book Journeys. So Annie, thank you very much for tagging me on that one. Everyone else, please do check out Annie's channel. And I'm going to try and answer the questions that have been set for me. I haven't really prepared them, apart from writing them down and watching Andy's video, obviously. But I'll see how I get on with them. Okay, so question number one. What makes a good book? I don't know. There's two ways of looking at this. Is what makes a good book, in my opinion, versus what is objectively a good book. In my opinion, what makes a good book is a book that lives with me inside my head and makes me feel something. And it has to make me feel something that the author intended, because if it just makes me feel rage and frustration that the author didn't intend, then it's probably a bad book. But as far as what makes a good book objectively, I don't think anyone knows. I mean, take for example something like Confederacy of Dunces by John Kennedy Toole. Now, for years, no one wanted to touch that with a barge pole. They didn't want to publish it, and it was only because of the determination and stubbornness of his mother was it actually published posthumously, because everyone that she sent it to thought it was crap, but she just kept badgering them. And then it went on and won the Pulitzer Prize and is widely regarded as one of the best books of the 20th century. So if people who publish books for a living and decide what gets published don't know what a good book is, then neither do the rest of us. And if someone says they do know what a good book is, then they're either lying to you or they're lying to themselves. Anyway, okay, so question number two. What am I currently reading? It'd be no surprise to you to know that I'm currently reading one of the Discworld books, which is Men at Arms. That's part of my read through of the Discworld series. I'm also reading, I'm going to get this wrong, 11/22/63 by Stephen King, and I'm enjoying that one as well. I just yesterday finished reading The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath, so I've got to pick up something else next, and I think it's probably going to be This Is How You Lose the Time War. So I'll keep you posted as to what I think of that one. Right, question number three. Last book you DNF'd and why? I actually don't DNF books very often. If it's a book that I'm probably not going to enjoy, I generally don't pick it up to begin with. The last one I remember DNFing was a book called Seduction of the Innocent by Frederick Wortham. Don't know if you've ever heard of that one, but around about the 50s or 60s, I think it is, in the States, there was a massive pearl-clutching scare about how comics were the cause of all ills in society and all juvenile delinquency. And that was largely down to this book, The Seduction of the Innocent by Frederick Wortham. Got interrupted by a dog there. Anyway, as I was saying, the scare of comics largely came as a result of the book Seduction of the Innocent by Frederick Wortham. So I wanted to read that out of curiosity. It's a pretty infamous text. And I started reading it. And actually, to be fair, at the beginning, he makes some very valid points about how there's things like the violence is pretty unchecked in it. The violence is largely directed towards women, and in a lot of things like say the Jungle comics that were there, the heroes, the Tarzan like heroes, were tended to be white and male and blonde, and the villains all were native Africans and things like that. So I was reading this and I was thinking, this is quite progressive. This is actually a really good point. And then it drops off a cliff and he just loses the plot and blames absolutely everything on comics and finds all of these various different connections to just about every single ill in society, and it's comics' fault. So I quit. I didn't have the stomach to keep going with that one. So that was the end of me reading Seduction of the Innocent by Frederick Wortham. So yeah, that was the last one I DNF'd. Okay, what obscure book do you wish other people would read? That's question number 4. Okay. Well, I don't think it's particularly obscure, but the one I just mentioned was Confederacy of Dunces by John Kennedy Toole. And like I said, it's not particularly obscure, but it does seem to be a book that has dropped off the radar a little bit in recent years. There seems to be an awful lot less people putting in their top 10s of the best books that they've read. And if anything, in the current day and age, it's even more relevant. The main character, Ignatius Riley, is this obese pseudo intellectual who lives in his mum's, won't get a job, and sees himself as this arbiter of all good taste, and that everyone else's taste is poor, and he's he is a Reddit board come to life. And it's a fantastic book. It's really, really funny, and I'd recommend anyone reading it. But that's not that obscure. Again, another one that's probably dropped off the radar a bit in recent years is I, Claudius by Robert Graves, which is the fictional autobiography of the Roman Emperor Claudius, who history remembers as being intellectually inferior, but is sort of written by Robert Graves as someone who is actually very intelligent, but has been seen to be intellectual inferior because of the stammer that he has. And it's about his before he becomes emperor, seeing the previous emperors like Titus and Caligula, and all the bonkers things that they did. So that one is well worth a read. Again, not that obscure, but probably less well known these days. If you want to go for an obscure one, I'm going to say Strumpet City by James Plunkett, and that is, unless you're Irish, that's pretty obscure, and it is a historical novel set in the early part of the 20th century, and for a change, for Irish novels of that period, that are set in that period, it isn't concerned with Irish independence. It's actually concerned with poverty and workers in Dublin at the time, and it's a big sprawling novel with a lot of characters, but it's absolutely fantastic. I reread it again this year. I read it many, many years ago and didn't really remember it, but I reread it this year, and it is up. It's probably one of my favorite books that I've read this year. So yeah, Strumpet City by James Plunkett. Check that one out. Okay, number 5. What's the longest book I've read? It's probably either going to be one of the Brandon Sanderson Stormlight Archive books. Bleak House by Dickens is pretty long. Actually, it's probably the uncut version of The Stand by Stephen King. That's it doesn't feel like it's a long book, but yeah, that's a beefy one. That'll take you a while to get through. Right, number 6. If I was going to have dinner with 5 fictional characters, who would they be? I don't know. What sort of tone would I go for? Would I be going for an intellectual discussion at a table, where sitting around the table with people like, I don't know, Atticus Finch and Professor Dumbledore? Or would I go for a night of raucous revelry with the likes of Eddie Dean from The Dark Tower? Tell you what I'd go for. Let's have the most chaotic dinner possible. Jack Torrance from The Shining, Randall McMurphy from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, the Joker from Batman, and all 3 of them are played by Jack Nicholson. So 3 Jack Nicholsons around the table. That's going to be pretty nuts. And let's add to that, I don't know, let's say Hannibal Lecter. He'd probably do the catering, and maybe Patrick Bateman from American Psycho. That'd be a hell of a dinner party. If I was going to have 5 books with me on a desert island, which books would they be with, and why? First of all, I don't like the threat that's implied in that question. And I would take a big rubber inflatable book and How to Make Oars Out of Sand. That joke was stolen from the comedian Ardal O'Hanlon. Realistically, what I'd probably take, I would take some form of survival book by someone like, I don't know, Ray Mears or Bear Grylls or someone like that, because, if I was to land on a desert island, despite the fact that I do venture outdoors occasionally, if I was in a desert island, I'd be eaten by crabs or coconuts, or I don't know what eats you on a desert island. This is why I need the book. Let's say next, I would probably take something that I wouldn't get sick of reading. So I'll take Catch-22 because I never tire of rereading that one. And weirdly, I never tire of rereading Dracula either, despite the fact that objectively it's not great, but you know, it has a lot of nostalgic value for me. So that's 2 slots left. I'd probably take 2 things that I would now have no excuse but to go and read, and things I've been sort of sitting on my TBR for many, many years. So probably War and Peace and the Brothers Karamazov. Then yeah, if I'm on a desert island, I have no excuse not to read them then. I've got plenty of time on my hands. I had to move on from my previous location. You wouldn't have thought a Welsh mountain to get crowded, but on a fine day like today, well, you know, it was starting to get like a train station up there. So I'm somewhere a wee bit more secluded to answer the last couple of questions. Right. What book could you not put down? Number 8. Okay. I would say the one that I remember that I couldn't put down was probably Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. It was just about the fact that it was the culmination of all of these books, and on its release, got the book and read it cover to cover over the course of a couple of days. Now, I'd like to point out that I was nearly 30 years of age at the time, but still, I've been so invested in the whole story that, yeah, Harry Potter and Deathly Hallows is probably the last one I remember that I wasn't able to put down. Okay, question number 9. 5 authors I will never read. Oh God, I don't know. I don't really have authors in my head that I'm utterly adverse to, but I think there's probably a genre of fiction that just doesn't appeal to me. Not that there's anything wrong with it. It's just the sort of romantic novels that are aimed at what was probably my parents' generation. So, you know, your things like Barbara Cartland, Danielle Steele, Jackie Collins, Jilly Cooper. How many is that? Must be close to 5. E.L. James. I don't fancy reading the 50 Shades books. They don't appeal to me at all. And final question, if I was to write a book, what would it be about? Okay, so a few years ago, there was a story about the village that I am originally from in Ireland. And it was a story of this major drugs bust that had happened. And what had happened was they were using diesel generators to maintain the climate in whatever growing greenhouses or whatever it was that they were using to grow cannabis. And the reason they were caught is because they were using farm diesel, which is a dyed diesel, which doesn't get paid tax on, which farm equipment can use, but isn't allowed to be used on the road. The customs officers were going in because the amount of diesel that was being consumed on the farm was more than any other farm would be. And they ended up stumbling onto one of the biggest drugs busts in Irish history. And I always thought that would be a great story. The story of some customs guy who's just checking up on illegal use of diesel and ending up with the biggest drug bust in Irish history. Yeah, I think there's a noir thriller in that. So that would be the book I would write. And I'd call it Diesel. So anyway, that was me. That was my 10 questions. Again, please check out Annie at Obscure Book Adventures. And thank you very much for tagging me in this. And I'll see you again soon. Take care.